Hey everyone, and welcome back to another tutorial. In this one, you're gonna learn how to build a JavaScript calculator using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. All the basic web technologies that you love and I have been working for more than 8 years now. I was highly inspired by this calculator application from my Android phone, and that is what I have replicated with these technologies. And I did all of that during a Twitch stream that I do every week. And I know that a lot of you folks who watch the video have not subscribed to the channel, so please subscribe to the channel. And without further ado, let's get started.
Yeah, as always, show my GitHub first time, because if you don't know where to start or where to look into when we talk about our projects that we work during this stream on, this is where you would potentially go. So there's a GitHub called Code with SN, or GitHub organization, which is code-with-SN, and we have this JS beginners workspace where essentially you can see this particular workspace. And here, if you are just joining us today, what you would want to do is you would want to clone this project into your machine. So you would go to code and then just copy this link from here, and then just go to your terminal wherever you are, and then you can do a git clone this. And this is assuming that you already have Git installed in your machine and Node.js installed in your machine. We're not working with Node.js right away, but it's good to have that because we're going to be using some packages later on. But if you have any questions, feel free to chime in into the chat. The chat is super friendly. We have a lot of cool folks in the chat who can help you out as well. So yeah, make sure to do that. And if you want to join the community that we have, what you could do is I could quickly get it from my bio link. So you can find all the links at bio.link muhd_snias. There you should be able to find the Twitch link as well. Well, you're already on Twitch, so you don't need that. But then you also have the YouTube link, the link to Discord. So this is the link that I'm talking about. So I'm going to paste that in the chat as well. You could just go there and find it out. All right. And yeah, mostly some of the concrete videos that I create, they end up going to YouTube. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's have a look at what we are going to build today. I actually have this Android phone, and in my Android, I have this application, if you can see this. So this is the calculator that this phone has, and you can see it's sort of black. All in all, it has these buttons which are of different shades as well. The equals button is a bit different. It's sort of pinkish here, and then the top area, that's a bit gray, so to say. All right, so we're gonna try to build this with JavaScript, and we're gonna be covering some of the concepts along the way. I'm gonna be trying to make it as simple as possible, so bear with me. And then we'll first talk about those concepts, how to do that, and then we'll jump into it. And then we'll also try to keep this sort of as clean as possible, so to say. All right, so yeah, I hope that you're pumped up, and if I show you the final result, this is what it looks like. So we have this calculator where we have the exact same UI, or not, if not pixel perfect, then it's quite the same as what I have in my mobile. So I worked on this last night, and in this calculator we are capable of doing some simple arithmetic operations. So in the previous stream I taught about how to perform addition, multiplication, division between two different numbers, and how to get those two inputs, and then how to try to kind of calculate based on the operator. So it's quite the same, but here the logic is going to be a bit different. So for instance, I could say 36 plus 69, and here we go. We get an output here. And then I could keep adding or keep continuing with the calculation on top of this. So I could now say multiply by 5. So that kind of picks up the previous result and then kind of goes on and on and on. If I don't press, let's say, an operator right away and press a number, let's say if I press 9, then now we're talking about a new sort of calculation continuing from here. So I can say 9 plus 9, and then ends up as 18. Then I could say plus 6 minus 3 multiply by 9 divided by 2, and we have a value here. So we have something already built. And if you want to have a look at the final version of this, what you would do is the repository that I was talking about, which is code with SN. We got beginners workspace, view all branches. Yeah, so we have this branch called JS calculator prototype. If you switch to this branch, you will essentially see all the data. Let me quickly explore it for you. So this branch has this new folder JS calculator, while the main branch does not have it. So I would recommend not looking at that, but if you want to look at it right away just for the sake of looking and not kind of ignoring the everything else, then yeah, you can switch to that branch for us. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be working with git bash in my terminal, and we are going to start from scratch. So I'm gonna take this one out, kind of put it away, let's see, and there we go, cool. And now what we can do is we can switch to our main branch, so git checkout main. And if you already have the code, all you need to do is to do a git pull, and when you do that, you should have the latest code from master. And once you have this from master, then we're gonna talk about how to improve this, right? And how to start implementing this. So first thing first, what we want is essentially this JS calculator file. Right now, since I changed my branch, I don't have this file, so I'm going to close this. And there is a really cool repository that is Florin Pop app ideas. All right, so first thing first, create a new folder. So we're going to go here to the root of the folder, and then here we're going to say JS calculator, and then we're just going to copy paste these two files, these two really cool files from here. From the main one, now we have this JS calculator file, so we are going to just rename these two things. So we are going to say JS calculator, and here also we are going to say calculator. And once we have this, then we're talking about this JavaScript, right? So we have a bunch of things going on here. We're not going to be taking the user input from this, but let's first actually open this to see what the code tells us right now. So open this. So this is the previous program that we had, right? So we were supposed to take some inputs like 55, 66, and then we were supposed to tell an operator. So we said plus, and here when we entered, then we got this whole thing being appeared on the view, right? So this was sort of the beginning of where we want to go, but essentially it's going to be much better than that, because we are going to be talking about the calculator itself. Now if you go back to this code or this URL, did I share that? No, maybe not. I'm going to share that in the chat as well. So this is a really good repository for ideas, and the good thing about this is that it has the levels. For instance, you can see app ideas, projects, and then beginner. So you have a lot of beginner level projects like calendar application, calculator application, JavaScript validation with regex, quiz app. There's a bunch of things that we can do actually in our next couple of streams, but what we went with right now is the calculator application. And the good thing about this one is that it really has all this information for like, hey, you can see the user stories, and the user can see display or can see a display showing the current number entered or result of last operation, blah blah blah. And then you also have these other things as well. User can see the entry pad containing buttons. User can enter number sequence up to 8 digits long by clicking the digits in the entry pad. We have some of the constraints defined on what things should be doing. We can also see some bonus features, so you can get the requirements of this application from here. Let's actually begin. For that, I'm going to be referring to my Facebook, where I actually posted this image. So I'm going to go to my profile, and if I can find my post which has this, yeah, there we go. So we have this image that we are going to try to replicate. We're going to see some colors. I have an extension that I use for picking out colors, but our whole application would look something like this. Now, first thing first, what we need to do is essentially to include a good font like this one. Most of the Android phones that we have today, they use the font called Roboto. So we're going to be using that, but this is something that we can actually do at the end as well. So let's not start with that, but rather start with simpler things. And by simpler things, I mean we can start with the layout and kind of think through, you know, this is also something that when you're converting a design to its implementation, in terms of front end, this is how you should be thinking about different things as well. So I'm going to teach you that as well. So let's go to Miro. Let's go to Miro, and I'm going to copy this image. We paste this image, and we have this here. So if we have to create a sort of box around this, we would do it something like this, and we will then sort of click this, outline this, make this thicker. Now you see it. So this is much better. So when we think about just outlining how we think about HTML or PSD to HTML or design to HTML, this is how you would think. So first of all, we have this outermost box, and that's one thing. Then inside, we can divide this whole layout into two different things. One can be this gray background that you see, and the second part is this whole black background. So one is for output and one is for input, right? So we can essentially create, let's say, two different boxes. So I could start from here and call this guy, change the color maybe, and this is sort of the input for us. And then this folk here is essentially, sorry, that was the output and this could be the input. All right. So now we're talking about an outermost box, which has two different boxes inside, or two different elements inside. And then this can be now divided into further boxes as well. We don't need this header that's part of the operating system, but we need these two things. One we can call accumulator, and the second one we can call, let's say, the total that we see right now. So if we had to divide these two things, that would mean that we would have something like this here. So we would have, let's say, one element that is this one. Let's give this the color green, and then actually let's copy this, paste this here, and then kind of make it here so we can do something like this. All right, so we have now thought about a bit on how this would be structured, and now that we have this, the only thing left is these buttons. Let's talk about buttons. Now all of these things that you can see, they can be kind of called a button, so to say. So let's say this one is here, let's color this purple, and then we could copy this, something like this, paste, put it here, paste, put it here. Now that we have those, we're going to copy all these, kind of paste this like this. I'm actually enjoying this right now, and this. Now the thing is that all these efforts that I'm doing right now, this helps us write the code in a better manner. And as you practice more, you won't have to do this. You will do all of this in your head because things become faster then, right? So this is how you would structure your whole code comes to converting from design to actual implementation. All right, now that we have this information, how can we convert this into actual UI? So that's where the code now comes in. So I'm gonna kind of go and share with you how I'm imagining this. So I'm going to go to my HTML here, and in my HTML, we just have this JS calculator right now, as you can see here. So if I refresh, no, that's not the file. So we have to open this file, reveal it in Explorer, double click this, and then we have the JavaScript as well. So I'm going to uncall this main and actually remove everything from main right now. And we have all these functions here that we can use as well. So I'm going to kind of refresh this, move this around, close this, and now this is what we have in the beginning. Now we have to kind of reach to this level, so I'm going to be working on the HTML and CSS right now. So now that we have this, let's talk about structure. So we're going to be using something really cool within VS Code that is called Emmet to create some quick UI. So as we discussed, this is the outermost layer, which is the red one. We could call this calculator container or just calculator, so to say. So we're going to create a div, and then we are going to call it calculator. And the way we do that is we can quickly type a dot and then calculator. And you can see here that it says Emmet abbreviation. And by that, it means that we are using something within VS Code that helps us create a really quick skeleton. So if I just hit tab or enter, you will see that it creates a div with the exact class. All right. So this is a really cool tip to generate HTML right away. For instance, I could do something like if I had to create an element with an ID, I could do my ID, and you can see that it creates a div with my ID. Now, what if I wanted to create a span with an ID? So you could do span and then hash and then ID. So my ID, and you see that we create a span with the ID. Now you could combine this with a lot of things, like you could say a p tag with first class, and then also having a second class, and then also having some ID. So now you can see that this has this first class, the second class, and the ID as well. And that's not only all of it. You could also do something like, hey, I want a div that has an ID container, inside which I could have another div, and that could have, let's say, a list class, and then inside that div I want another set of divs. So I could say div that could have a class of list item, but I don't just want one of these divs, but 12 of these divs. So I could multiply this with 12, which means that when I hit enter, you see a container, a list, and 12 items. And now the cursor that you see here is right here. So you can just type something like 1, 2, 3 and press tab. So you go to the next div, then you type here, then you type here, and you can easily, without having to even use your mouse, you can easily go forward from here. You can see that we can create a lot of things using the simple syntax. But now let's talk about what we want for this calculator itself, right? So we see that we have this red line, which is the outermost container. So we can call it calculator. So we are gonna call this calculator. So we can say calculator, and here we get this div. Now we discussed that inside this red line, we have these two containers, the blue one and the yellow one. Now the blue one is supposed to show outputs, and this yellow one is supposed to contain some inputs. So what we can do is that we can say, hey, there's going to be an element that's going to have a class of output, and I'm using this underscore underscore terminology, which is the BEM method. So if you go to getbem.com, you can see the information right there, but I can quickly explain what this means. The BEM sort of terminology is something that is used as a standard in many organizations, and that essentially just helps you organize your code to see what is the hierarchy of the divs. For instance, right now we are using this name, which means that we have a block that is calculator, but inside this block we have an output element. So BEM actually stands for block, element and modifier, and the naming is really simple. If you have an element inside of a block, you just prefix the name with the block and then underscore underscore. So if I have another element inside this output, then I'm going to be doing something like calculator underscore underscore output and then underscore underscore whatever the next name of the element is. So if we go back to the design, you can see that in the output, which is this blue line here, we have two elements. One is this green and the second one is this green. So we can call the above one accumulator maybe, or we could show it expression as well. We could call it whatever we want. Let's go with accumulator for now. And then we have another element. So that's going to be calculator. And instead of just typing this, because it is prone to errors, I'm going to copy this one and then paste this. And then instead of accumulator, I could just say total. All right. Now that we have this information, we are just going to use the hard-coded values just to see this. So 23 plus 6 plus 9 is going to be shown in the above one. And here we can show 38. Now that we have this HTML sort of figured out for the output, you can see that this is the red one. This block is the blue one. And then inside this blue one, we have two blocks, two elements, this one and this one. And that is it for the output. Now that we have this output, let's talk about input. So we can say calculator underscore underscore input, and you can see that we have a lot of buttons. So 1 2 3 4 columns, and then we have 5 rows. So 4 into 5 is 20. So I'm going to multiply this with 20, and then we get 20 elements right here. Okay, now we can go through each of these and kind of just write it as an element text or the text within these divs. So starting with the first one, it's AC. The second one is delete, so we are just going to type DEL for now. Then we have the percentage sign, if I can get this right on this Nordic keyboard. Then we have the divide sign, so let's go with a slash. Then we have 789. So as you can see, I'm going it from top left to right in row by row. So we are taking the concept of going from left to right. On my screen it's different, so left to right, and we are going in sort of a way where we go then down as we go through different rows. So we got AC, delete, then percentage, then divide, then 7 8 9 multiply, then 4 5 6 minus, 1 2 3 plus, and then this sign which is full screen, and then 0 dot then equals. So let's do that. So now we are gonna type 7, then 8, then 9, and as we go downwards, first we have this multiplication sign, then we have 4 5 6 minus, so 4 5 6 minus, then we have 1 2 3 plus, and finally we have full screen, let's say FS, then we have 0, then we have a dot, and as you can see, as soon as I press dot, this starts the emit, so we don't want that. So I'm just gonna type tab, and then here we have the equals sign, so let's do that. Now that we have this, let's quickly see how this looks on the UI. So if I refresh now, you can see this, which is super ugly, doesn't look good at all, right? But that's because we just have laid down the HTML and not even a single word of styling. All right. So how do we go about that? First, we need to create a new file for styling. So we can call it styles.css. And then we need to import this styles file into our code. So let's just put a dummy background here. We can say background color red. Now this background color red in CSS is equal to the JavaScript equivalent of console log. So if you want to check that your CSS is working, that's what most engineers do. Right now you can see it doesn't work because we have created a file, but we haven't imported it into our HTML. So we're gonna go and do that. So in the HTML, we're gonna go into the head area up top, and then here we're going to create a link tag because that's how you link your CSS file. So we're going to use link. Then we need to define the rel, and then we need to define style sheet here, which means that the browser knows that this link is of type style sheet. There are also other sort of links like fav icons and whatnot. So we are using style sheet here. Then we use href for defining the path for this. Now this is different from script because a script tag has this source attribute, whereas link has this href attribute, and they both do the same thing. You need to define the path to the CSS file. So I can say /, which means in the same folder we have this HTML, which is the JS calculator. In the same folder we have this style.css. So here we import this, and that's it. You can see that this has a closing tag as well. So now that we have this, if we refresh, boom, our console log / the background color is working. So this means that our styles would now work, and the style that we have applied is on body. Now if you're an absolute beginner to JavaScript, of course, then what you would see is that for this CSS rule, what we have defined is the body tag without any dot or slash or hash. If we type just the tag name and then apply a style, it applies directly to all the elements or all the tags of that style. For instance, I could say div, and then I could say background color yellow. Now that means that every div here is gonna have the background color yellow, but not this part because this is not a div, this is an h1. So if I save this, refresh, you can see that all of these elements got this background color. We could give this margin of, let's say, 10 pixel, and you would see that now we have the margin as well for these elements. I'm going to quickly see one thing that I want to see. Then we could also say something like, hey, we want all divs, but only with the class, let's say, input. So we could go here and say calculator input, which means that we're talking about a div, but then having this class also. So the same div having this class will get this yellow background. So if I refresh, now you see that we don't have this applied to the outer container, but the inner container as well. All right. And if I go further and just say, hey, no, not the input, but each button, only the button would have this class. So then we are talking about this class. So every button would have a yellow background and a margin. So if I refresh this, go here, you see that now each button has this URL. All right. Now this could be the ugliest calculator that you would see. So let's revert this and talk about how we actually want to see this. So the first thing first, what we need to define is this layout. So here you can see that the outermost container that we have, this is sort of having a width and having a height. The width is different from the height itself. So what we can do is that we can essentially have the width and height of this depending on some sort of ratio as well. But for starters, we can go with something like finding this calculator, which is the outermost or this red block, so to say. So the outermost block that we want to define is this one. So we can call this border 1 pixel solid red. And if I refresh, you can see that now we got this border, right? And now we need to define how thick this border is going to be, how high this border is going to be. So we can define this by saying, hey, the width of this one is going to be, let's say, 350 pixels. And the height of this calculator is going to be 500 pixels. And then once we refresh this, you can see that now we have the width 350 pixel and the height is 500 pixel. I'm going to reset the zoom from here because we are zoomed in too much. So I'm going to reset this. Now this is how this would look when you're running this on an actual device without any zooming in. So this is how the calculator looks. Now, if we want to center it, one of the techniques to center an element horizontally within the page is to define two things. One is the width, which means it has to have a fixed width, centering element horizontally. And then you also need to define a margin. So the margin can be 0 and auto. Now this 0 means that the top and bottom margin would be 0, but the left and right margin will be auto, which means that it will automatically calculate its margin and become centered. So if I refresh, you can see that now it's centered. Why is it centered? If I inspect this, you will see that here in this particular element, which is the calculator, if I can get to it, you can see that we have this orange area on left and right of this, which means that it has this margin 0 auto. So if I remove this, you can see it goes back, but if I apply this again, you see that now it is centered. So this is one technique, one CSS technique that you will see most of the times when you're working and centering things. So now that we have this one, we can define a color for this one. So you can see that here we have the color, overall color as in black, but then this part is gray. So what we can do is that we can give this whole, can I zoom in? Yes, please zoom in. So what we can do is that we can give this whole box or this whole red box the color black, but then we'll override the color of this output to gray. Okay. So we are gonna say, hey, give this whole thing a color of black. So we can say #000, which means black essentially. So once we refresh, you can see that now we have this being shown here. Okay. So it's coming out in a good way. I'm gonna improve the border a bit just to show that. And then we're gonna remove these borders, right? They look ugly, of course. So now that we have this, one other thing to understand is that the text that we show within here should be white, because right now you don't see anything. All the text that we had is now gone. If I remove this, refresh, you see the text here. But if I kind of give this the color black, then the text is black as well. And the color is, or background is black as well. So you obviously won't see anything because they both are the same. So we need to define the color, which means the color here would be FFF, which is white. So if I refresh now, you see that we now get these colors. Okay. So I hope this makes sense. Now this height can be increased as well, but I'm going to give this a minimum height instead of a maximum height. And we'll see why that is as we go forward. Okay. So now that we have the width, the height, the background, and the margin as well, let's talk about this other box or the top box now, which looks like this. Now, if you have a quick look at this, you will notice that this box itself, this has this gray background, and then it also has this sort of curved border, like something like this at the bottom on the right side and on the left side, right? But the top edges, if you notice, are quite sharp. So they're pointy. They're not curved. All right. So we need to make that as well. But let's talk about first creating this box. So for the output, what we're going to do is the output element has the class calculator underscore output, which is this one. And then we are going to go here and then we can say calculator output, which means the div that has this class calculator output. We need to style it. We need to first give this a background. So in order to kind of get the background, I use an extension that is color picker. Like the color picker, this kind of gives me this really nice tool, and you can see that I can go into this page and kind of select any color that I want. So here I'm going to click this gray color. This is 1C1D1F. I'm going to double click, copy this, close this. And then I'm going to go here and then just use the color here. Okay. We're going to go and say background color. And here we can say #1CD1F. If we refresh, you can see that we got a color here, but that doesn't look like what we actually want. So we're going to have to give this a particular height. So you can see that this has some height here. So what we are going to do here is that we're going to give this a height. So we can say 250 pixel, for instance. And if we refresh, now this looks a bit more than what it was looking. So now it looks quite similar, which is perhaps okay for us. But one of the things that I discussed was this border at the bottom. You can see that the border here is very sharp. I'm going to remove this red block here just to be more clear. So now you can see that here the corners are very sharp for this calculator, but this needs to be a bit curved. So what we do here is that if we apply a border of 1 pixel white and then solid, you will see that we get a border white just like this, or actually let's use red. Okay. So if I give this a border, then you can see we get something like this. But if I give this a border radius, then that means that we are going to curve the edges. So here we could say something like 20 pixel. And if I refresh, go back, you can see that now we got this curve. But the thing is, if you look at the top as well, you see that the curves are here as well, top left and top right. And they're also at the bottom right and at the bottom left. Now the thing is that we don't want these sort of curves at the top because our calculator doesn't have it. Our calculator only has that at the bottom left and bottom right. So instead of using the border radius, what we can do is we can say border dash bottom right radius. And then here we can provide this a value. So let's say we go with 30 pixels. And now if I just refresh, you will see that we only have this border radius here. This one is sharp, this one is sharp, this one is sharp as well. Okay. So instead of this bottom right here, we could use bottom left radius, refresh, and then you see, boom, we got the left and right one and not the top left and top right. And now we can remove this red solid border here. And now you see that it kind of looks similar to what we have, right? So you can see here, it's like this, and here we got this as well. Now you can increase or decrease this based on your own preference. For instance, I think right now it's too much. So we can go with 26, I think. So if I refresh now, yeah, it's a bit more like, but not exactly like, so I'm gonna go with 22. Now, if you had a design on Figma or something, you would have the exact value for this one, but since we just have an image, we don't have the exact sort of radius value. We're gonna experiment and see what looks and feels good to us. All right, now that we have this, let's talk about placing these two things appropriately. So this one looks like this and this one looks like this. So what we want is to kind of center these vertically, but then have sort of spacing in between those, right? So if you have not worked with Flexbox Froggy, I think is the thing. Yeah, so there's a really cool game called Flexbox Froggy that you can try out, and I can share the link in the chat as well. And this is really cool to understand how different things work with Flexbox. So if I can just show you real quick some examples, you will understand what we are trying to do here. The Flexbox Froggy essentially tells us how to place different elements into different scenarios based on Flexbox. For instance, if I have to put something at the very end in a row, I can use justify content flex end and with a display flex. So you can see that this frog is now at this particular end. If I go forward to the next example, you can see that here we need to make sure that these two frogs are at the center of this row. So this is whole a row. You can see some spacing there, but this is essentially a row. So in order to center these, we need to do something like justify content, and then here we can say center. And once we do this, we should be able to see them as centered. Let me see, justify content. Oh, we don't use quotations here. All right, so you can see that they are now centered. Similarly, if we go forward, you will find other examples as well, like, hey, if I wanted to make these spaced evenly, what you would use? So this is a really good example for you to try out, but I'm going to be choosing some of the things from this one, the only things that we have to cater today. So for instance, we need to make this centered vertically. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to say this container, which is the output. So we need to center these two things, right? And the way we center these two things is by applying some CSS to the output. So you can see here that we have this as an output or container. So we are going to give a class to the container or a style to the container. And here we can say display flex. Now if I save this and refresh, you will see that they go side by side by default. This is the output and this is the total. So if I right click and inspect this, kind of small this down, you will see that here we have this calculator output, which is the container, and here we have this element, which is the accumulator, and this second one is the total. Now you can see that these are two side by side, and that is the default behavior of Flexbox. It kind of puts things in a row. What we want is for them to be on top of each other in sort of a column way. So what we do here is that we say flex direction is going to be column instead of row. By default, it's set to row. So if I set row here, save, refresh, nothing would change. But if I change this to column, you will see that now if I refresh, they are on top of each other. So if I show you here, you can see that we have the calculator output here, and then now here, this is the first one and this is the second one. So that's how you change the direction of the flexbox itself. Now we want them to be centered in this whole output area. You can see that if I hover over it on the output, you can see that we have this sort of green area or greenish area where the elements exist, and then there's this purple area which is not being used at all. That's empty, free space. What we want for this element to do is using all this space but then centering these two elements in between. So in order to do that, what we do, we need something called justify content and then do center. And if I save this and refresh this, you see that now they are centered vertically. So if I go here, you can see that now we have these two centered. We have the spacing above the element and below the element as well, right? So now you get the idea. One of the things that I can share with you when it comes to sort of spacing things between is there are two different things. One, how do we place them vertically and how we do them horizontally. So instead of center, if I did flex start, then this would be at the top, all right? If I do center, then they are centered. If I do space around, you will see something like this. So they kind of place space between them. You can see that this is what they are doing. They kind of have a space between them. But if I go on space between, you will see something like this, which means that now they have an empty space between these two elements. They're not using the around method, but they're using the between method. And if I wanted to evenly space them, we could use space evenly. So if I refresh here, now you can see that they have an even space. What do we mean by even space? We mean that at top, we have this purple area. You can see that that area is equal to the next purple area, which is in between those text. And then the next area, the purple area below that is exactly the same. So these spaces are exactly even. So if we want to space evenly, we can use space evenly. If we want to just make sure that, hey, they have some space around them, then we can use that. Or if we want space between them, we can use space between. But in this case, we want to have this centered. So this is now centered vertically, but what we want exactly is to look something like this. Now, in order to get this space exactly, we can do some things, and I'm going to share that with you as well. But before that, now let's talk about horizontal spacing, because here you can see that this is aligned to the right side, or if I show on my screen, it's on the right side. How do we make sure that they are on this particular side? And we do that by using another property. Just like we have justify content, we have another property, which is for horizontal alignment when you have the flex direction set to column. So if I go and say align items, I can use flex start, which is exactly what we have right now. If I use center, then we have something like this. So you can see that both of these are centered horizontally. You can see this, all right? But if I do flex end, that means they go towards the right side, which is exactly what we want, right? So now if I have a look at this one, you can see it's quite similar. The only difference is that they are kind of touching the right side, which is not exactly what we want. We want some spacing from the right side. And since the spacing is from within the gray area, we consider this as padding. So in this output, which is this gray area, we want some padding. So if I give this, let's say a border again, let's say 1 pixel solid red, show you this. Now if I want to give this some spacing from within the gray area, which means inside this border or inside this gray element, what I need to use is called padding. So I'm going to use padding 0, and then I can use something like 30 pixel. And the reason of 0 is we don't want any padding from bottom and top. We only want a padding from left and right. So this means top and bottom, and this means left and right. So if I save this, refresh this, now you see that we got some spacing. It's quite similar to what we have here, maybe a bit more. So we could do a 26 pixel as well. Let's refresh. So now this looks a bit better. Okay, so we got this now. Let's talk about how we move forward with further of the logic or further of the styling. So now we need to sort of give these folks some font size. So first let's talk about this one. So for this one, I'm gonna pick the color using the color picker. So here, can I move this? No. And then here we have this sort of color, which is this 89 blah 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 8D. So I'm gonna copy this, and then here just shorten this down, and the color now that we want to give is just to this particular element, which is the accumulator for us, which is this one. So this one has the class calculator output accumulator, so we're going to use that. So we have calculator underscore underscore output underscore underscore accumulator. Here we're gonna give this a background, or not the background but the color, because this is a text color of this gray. Now if we refresh, you can see that now we got the color. Now it's time for us to give this a font, so we are going to increase the font size a bit. So let's say font size is right now, we could give this let's say 24 pixel, and then refresh, and now you see we have something like this. Now for this one, this is going to be a bit more, or the font size is going to be a bit more increased. So what we can do here is that we can give this class of this element. So this element is called total, where we have this 38 being written. The color would be still white, but the font size would increase. So let's say we have this class output total, and then here we are going to say font size, and let's perhaps use the font size 54 pixels. If I refresh now, you see we have something like this, and you see that it's quite close to what we have, but the spacing here is a bit more. So you can see spacing here is a bit more. So in order to get that spacing, we can give a margin to this accumulator. We can say margin bottom, let's say 10 pixels. And then if I save, refresh, you can see we got more spacing. So you could give more spacing, like something like this. So it's quite now similar to what we have here. Maybe give a bit more of a spacing, let's say 20 pixel. Refresh. Yeah, now it looks much more like what we see here. The font is absolutely different, so that's one thing that we need to fix. But for now, I think at least the font size looks good. Now that we have this information, we need to go forward and style the inputs, because these are the only things remaining, right? So for this one, first of all, we need to make sure that this is not highly close to this upper border. So we need to make sure that this is a bit lower. So if I go and say calculator underscore underscore input, which is exactly the class that we have on the container of the input, which was the container that we discussed, the yellow box that you see here. So for this yellow box, I'm gonna go here and then style it with a border 1 pixel solid yellow. And then no, we could give this 3 pixel, let's say. And then if I refresh, now you see we have this border. Now you can see that this is really close to the upper border, so we don't want that. We're gonna give this a margin, so we can say margin top, and then let's say 16 pixels, and then refresh. Now you see that it's a bit downwards, and that is okay for us because we want exactly that. Now that we have this input, we also need, one of the things that I'm thinking about now is we could give this margin, we could give this some sort of padding as well. So let's see. So now that we have this, we need to make sure that we are creating something like this, which means that we have some buttons and then we are kind of wrapping them around as well. So for these buttons, we need to increase the font size. So for that, what we are going to do is first, let's go ahead and create a class for the input buttons. And the class for that is, if I go here, you can see we have this class here. So we can say input button, and here we can say something like width, or maybe just the font size. So we can start with the font size cell. So we can say font size 24 pixels. And if we refresh, you can see that the font size is a bit increased. Now, in order to create those boxes first, we need to give this a width and height. So we can say width 70 pixels, height 70 pixels. And if I refresh now, you can see that we got some spacing, but still we don't see anything. So we are going to give this a background for now. Or we could also give this a border. So we could say border 1 pixel solid purple. Alright, now if I refresh, you can see that we have got borders around all of these boxes. The only thing is that all the boxes, all the buttons kind of come in a single line, and we actually don't want that. Another problem is that we have this text up top of the box, while we want this to be centered vertically and horizontally. So if we have an element
which just has a text and nothing else inside, we can center this text by just using text align center. And if I refresh, you see that horizontally this is now aligned. And the way to vertically align this center as well is to use something called line height when it's just text. So the line height here should be similar to the height of the box. So it's going to be 70 pixels for us. So we do 70 pixel, save, refresh, and now you see each box has this text at the very center. So this is pure CSS for you. Now that we have this information, we need some spacing from these boxes. So we're going to be using a margin. We're going to use the margin, let's say 5 pixel for now. Refresh, you see that we have some spacing from these buttons. All right. And now we can talk about some other things, like we could say, hey, whenever we want to press this button, we need to have sort of a cursor being shown. So for that, we can use cursor pointer. And now whenever I mouse over it, you can see this pointer, which tells the user that, hey, this is going to be a button that would be clicked. Okay. So now that we have this thing, let's talk about how to make sure that they are distributed as a grid, just like this. So in order to do so, as I said, we are going to use something called display flex. But in order to center these buttons or these buttons, we need to apply display flex to their parent. Similar to when we had to center these two outputs, we applied the CSS to the parent. So we are going to apply the CSS to this input, which is the parent. I'm going to remove this border from the output so we don't see it. All right. And now within this one, we need to be able to apply to this input class. So I'm going to go here, and this input would have a display flex. We always apply the display flex to the parent of the elements that we want to center or make grid of. Okay. So now if I refresh, you see that boom, all of the elements are right now in a row. As I shared with you before, by default, the flex direction is row, which is fine for us because in this case, we want them to be in a row. But when there is no more space, the row should go down, which means the next element should appear below the first row. So in order to do that, what we use is something called flex wrap, which means that if we have elements and they don't have a space, then the next element should go downwards to the next line. So we use the flex wrap. And if I save and refresh, you see that now every next element is now below whenever there's no more space for the next element. All right. So I hope this makes sense. Now, another thing that you see here is that they are not centered. You can see that this has, on the right side, we have much more space than on the left side. There's not much space here. So we need them to be horizontally centered. When we have display flex and flex direction column, for horizontal cases, we use align items. But when we have flex direction row, it's the opposite. So right now, the flex direction here is row. I could also type that if you want. So flex direction is row here. Now, in order to center something horizontally, if I try to use align items centered, you will see that nothing would change. But if I instead use justify content center, then you will see we got this centered. All right. So now that we have this, what we're going to do is kind of remove those borders. But before that, we need to make sure that whenever we have this element, it's circular. Right now, you can see that each element that we have here is not circular. It's a box. So in order to convert this button into a circular button, we have the border already. We can give this a border radius of 50%, which means that it's going to take this border and convert this into a circle. So if I save, refresh, you see now that we got these buttons, right? So it's a really cool trick to just convert any element into a circular element by giving this a square width and height, which means 70 pixel is exactly making a square. And then you use a border radius. All right. Now what we need to do is we need to be able to click this and sort of show the user that this has been clicked just in terms of UI. In order to do that, what we do is we can use something called hover, and we can choose what background color is shown when we hover a button. What I can do here is that I can use the same class calculator input button, but with hover, which means if I do this and I can use this background color, this one. So now if I save and refresh, you can see that as soon as And now you can see as soon as I mouse over these, you can see that they are highlighted. The thing is that in calculators, that is not the case, or in my mobile phone, that is not the case. There is no mouse over, right? But if I show you my screen, you will see that whenever I press a button, is it showing? Maybe. So whenever I press this, then you see that there is sort of a slight reflection, and it's only when you press something. So how do we, instead of mouse over, do this whenever someone is clicking? And the thing is that we have a pseudo class, we have a CSS pseudo class for that as well. This is actually a pseudo class, but instead of hover, if we use active, that means that we have clicked on it right now, and as soon as we remove the mouse button, so we press, that is mouse down, but if we do a mouse up again, then this will go away. So if I save this, refresh, and click here, you can see that now I have clicked on it and I'm kind of pressing my mouse right now as well. And as soon as I remove or lift my finger over the button, you can see that now it's gone. So when I click, you see this reflection. So this is exactly what usually you would feel when you are working this on a mobile. So now that we have this, we can remove this purple border because that's not in the original design. And now you can see this looks much more better, right? So we got the CSS now. Some of the things that are remaining is this yellow box. So I'm gonna remove this one as well. Refresh. Now it looks much more like our calculator. And the next thing that we want to do is to be able to style the rest of the stuff. So you can see here, we have this gray background for all of these elements. And then we have a pink background for this equals. So I'm gonna pick the color for this one. So for this gray background, we have the color 191919. So in order to just give these elements this particular color, what we can do is that, because we don't want this color to be applied to every color, right? So if I give, let's say, the background color to button, that means that I'm applying this to every color just like this. Now that's not the case. I only want this for these 4 elements. So what I would do here is that instead of giving this to this button class, I'm gonna go and here I'm going to give these elements which have these operators another class so I can style them. So I'm gonna apply another CSS class here for divide, multiply, minus and plus. So here I could add another class and I could call this something like calculator, and then we have input button and then dash core operator. Now the reason that we are using this dash is that this is in the sort of BEM tech terminology. This is the M, which means modifier. So what does a modifier mean? A modifier means that we already have an element, but this is a different state of this element, right? So we do have the input button, but this is a core button. So it's still a button, but it's a core button now. So the way to name this class is to just add a dash and then whatever value you think that this should have. So here I'm calling this core operator. You could call it just operator, and that's fine as well. So let's call this operator. And now if I save this, I'm gonna copy this class to the other elements as well. So it's core calculator input button operator. I'm gonna give the same class here as well. On multiply, then we have minus, and then we have plus. So we have given this class to all these 4 elements. Now we can go in the CSS file, and here we can say, hey, if we have an input button, but it also has a class of operator, then we apply some styles. And here we can use the same color that we just copied. So I'm gonna do that quickly again. It wasn't here, but it was more like here. So here I can pick this color. And then here we have 191919. And now if I refresh, you can see that only these 4 elements now have this color. And this hover state exactly works like a charm as well. The only thing remaining for us is we do have this equals, which needs to be a purple, right? So here you can see that if I go back to my design and pick this color, this is this purple color, which is something like C41442. So in order to give this equal, just this button a class, we can use an ID on this particular element, or we can use a modifier as well. It doesn't matter. So we can use a modifier. Let's say we have this equal button right here, The only thing is that whenever you have only single element or one unique element on your page, you usually use an ID. If you have, let's say, multiple elements that you want to style, then you use a class. So I can actually use an ID here, and I can call this equal button and then save this. And in the styles, I could go here and say, hey, the calculator input button having the ID, which is hashtag equal button, should have this style. So we can say background color, this color. So we are saying it's the same button, but it has an ID equal button, which it has. So it is the same class, but with the ID equal button. So now if I save this, go back, refresh, now you see we have this color as well, right? And now if I try to click here, you can see that now it does not reflect the color for when I hover or click active. Now the reason for that is the ID has a much higher value compared to this active class or the pseudo class. So I could either use a class instead of an ID or use important here. So I could use important and then this would start working. Now you can see that this works, right? But if I don't use important, then this ID takes precedence over and then it doesn't reflect on this equals. So another way would be to give this a class instead, or I could use important. So I'm going to use important for this case and just save. And now you can see that we can click. Now, one of the things that really is quite irritating in this whole exercise is that as soon as I start clicking multiple times, you can see that we get this blue thing here. And that is because this text is being selected. All right. So in order to make sure that when we click on this, nothing is selected, we can give this button something called user select none. And now if I go here and keep typing multiple times, you see that nothing happens. If I remove this, refresh, you can see that this comes back. But if I use user select none, that means that it is not going to be selected. And this makes sense because the user is not going to come here to select text. The user is going to come here to just click. Okay. Swig says, can we do CSS nth element rule for those buttons? That's a really good point. Yes, we can. I'm going to show you how we can do that as well. So instead of this class that we have button operator, we can remove the instances of this. So there's no class on these elements now. If I refresh, these colors go away. But if I go here instead of this operator, we could say every fourth element has that class. So we can use this input button, and then here we can say nth child, and here we can say for n. And that means that every fourth element, not m, for n, every fourth element is gonna have this class. So if I save this, refresh, now we got the classes as well. Really good suggestion, Sweek 1 right there. According to the CSS, I don't believe there's anything remaining for us to work on. This looks like a JavaScript calculator. This looks like what we have in design. I don't think we are missing anything. So we have all this, we have all this as well. Yeah, it's quite similar to the design itself. Now, the only thing is remaining is implementing the logic of sort of calculating everything. All right. So in order to do so, I'm going to be using some JavaScript, of course, but also it's going to be simple for now because we're going to use something that JavaScript gives out of the box, because right now what we have is actually use the font that is usually in Android, which is Roboto. So I'm gonna search Google font Roboto, and here you will find this link that you can open, Roboto Google Fonts. Open this and then you select a variation. For instance, you could select regular 400 if it looks like this one, all right, or you could use regular 300 or light 300. It depends on you. Let's go with regular 400. So we select this style and we can see the link tag for this font. So we can quickly copy this, go to our HTML, and up top here, just before the style sheet, we can paste this. Refresh. We go here in the style CSS and we apply a style to the body. Here we say body, and here we can copy what actually is provided from here as well. So this is the CSS rule that you have to apply. So you copy this and you just paste that for the body. Save this, go back to the browser and refresh this. Now you see that we have the Roboto being used and it's quite similar to what we have here. All right, cool, that makes sense. One of the things that I noticed is that this is way too bright, and here the style is a bit different, the color is a bit different as well. So let's see what is the color here for this AC. If I can get this gray color right. It's 9A, 9A, 9A. So let's actually change the color of the buttons. So we are gonna come here on the button class, and here we can say color 9A, 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 save, go back, refresh. Now this looks much more natural and much more like this one, right? Cool. And now we can start working on the JavaScript itself. Now, if I was to implement this using pure JavaScript, I would have taken another route and not use what I'm using right now. But since you're beginners, I'm just gonna show you some techniques, but with the default function that we can use to evaluate JavaScript. For instance, we have something in JavaScript that we can call, actually I can show you here, I think, if I can start Coca here. Coca, run on save for current file, run once for current file, start on current file. So we have this really cool extension called Coca, which essentially shows you the output as you're typing something. For instance, I could type eval, and here I could say something like 2 plus 2. And as I do this, I could do a console.log, and you see the result right here on this side. So 2 plus 2 equals to 4, 2 plus 12 equals to 14 and whatnot. So this is a really cool extension to try things out. As Seville says, eval is evil. So we shouldn't be using that in production code. This is just for you to sort of try things out. And then I think in the future version, now that we have this eval, this is actually what we want. So previously what we used to do was we used to take inputs from the users, but then we used to calculate them right away. Like give us the first number, give us the second number, and then calculate it. Here, we are not going to do in the same sequence. Here, we're going to have what the calculator usually does. So for instance, I'm first going to type 6, then I'm going to say plus, then I'm going to say 9, and then I'm going to say equals. So for that, we need to maintain this expression somewhere. To maintain this expression, I'm going to use a constant that, or let's create a variable, and we'll call it accumulator. And then this is the variable which is going to be storing all the information that we want. Then we'll also have another variable called total, and this total is going to be something that we show here up top. Okay, so these are the two things, and these are going to be changing as we go forward, right? So how do we keep this accumulator containing all this expression? So what we'll do is that whenever we press a button, we'll add that value to the accumulator, and then we'll show that. All right. So one of the things that we could do is use it on console. The other thing that we can do is to show it on the UI itself. So let's create a function for whenever we click a button. So for that, I'm going to create a function and call it, let's say, digit pressed. All right. Or number pressed. You could call it anything. And here we are going to pass the number. And here what we are going to do is just update the accumulator and add it as a string, just like this. Okay, so in this case, we are just updating the accumulator view, and then we are going to just console.log the value of the accumulator. So here we are having this number, and now we need to go to index.html, and here we need to just add this function on click. So for 7, we have on click digit pressed, and here as a string we are going to pass the value 7. So this is what it would look like. All right, yeah, this looks good on camera, so you are not missing anything. Similarly, we're going to paste this same thing here. So it's 7, then 8, then 9, and then we have the same for 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3, and then for 0. So let's quickly add these values. So we got 1, 2, 3, and this is 4, 5, 6. No, not plus, 6. 7, 8, 9. All right, we got all these values, and now when we click, we should be able to catch this function and then apply this on the UI as well. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh this now. If I start pressing any button, let's say I press 7, you can see that we got 7 on the console, right? Similarly, if I press 8 now, you see 78. Okay, so that is what's happening. If I say 78 or 38, I will first press 3 and then 8. If I press 66, then I would type 6 2 times, and that should show us 66. Okay, so whatever we type here, we should be able to see that on the UI. Okay, so what we will do here is that once we have this, we need to show this on console, but also we need to be able to clear this as well. So let's create a function for clearing the accumulator. So we could say const clear, and here we are going to just create a function, and the purpose of this function would be just to empty the accumulator. So here we could say accumulator should be empty. So if I go back, I can apply this on the AC button. So I can say on click, and here call the clear method. So whenever we do an on click on this element, we clear it out. So let's refresh, let's press 7 8, and now if I press AC and then press 9, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? So this clear method is not being executed because we have something called clear as a browser API as well, like this. So instead of clear, we could say clear calculator and then use that instead. So I'm going to go here, use this, and now let's try this. So I'm going to close this here, and now I'm going to say 7 8, and if I click C, you can see that now it came inside. Go forward, and now we have cleared this. Now if I press 6, you can see that now we have a clear slate. Okay, so now you can see that we got these information in place. The next thing is to actually show this on the UI. So in order to show this on the UI, what we can do is that we can first get the element, which is this output accumulator. So we can get this by class, and then we can show this output that we have instead in this particular view. So by default, I'm going to change what they have. So by default, this is this text, but I don't want to show that. And here I don't want to show this as well. So I'm going to save this, show this to you. And now what we want to do is whenever we press a button, we need to show this into the UI. So we are going to create a new function here. We're going to call this something like update accumulator view. So let's say update accumulator view. And here we are going to use this class to get this particular element. So we are going to say const and accumulator element, and here we can say document dot query selector, and here we are going to use the class using the dot. So this selector is absolutely equal to the CSS selector. So here you can see that we are using the output accumulator class, which is this one. So we are using the same selector here to get this document element. Why? We need to show this accumulator variable value into this HTML. So first we need to get this HTML element using accumulator elements, and then we can use something like ACCEL, which is the accumulator element dot inner HTML, and then equals to the value of accumulator. So we can say accumulator here. All right. So now that we have this, let's actually call this function right after digit press. So once we save this, you will see that now if I press 9, it comes here into digit press, it gets the value of 9, and then it logs it, and then it goes to accumulator view inside. Now it tries to get this document element using the query output accumulator. So if I go over this and hover over this, you can see that there's a pointer on the view that you can see. So there is where the element is, and now we can set the inner HTML to accumulator. So if I move forward, you can see we got the value right here. Okay, so now if I just remove the breakpoint and kind of keep adding elements, you can see that now whatever we add is added to the previous string. And this is really cool because in the previous classes or sessions, we discussed about string concatenation. That is what's happening here. Every new digit pressed is added to the accumulator string. All right, we could call it accumulator string as well, just for the sake of simplicity. And now we assign that to this HTML. So we see this. Now if I hit AC, which means that the accumulator string is cleared, and if I now press 9, you see that we only got 9. But we didn't do anything on AC, so we also need to update the accumulator view when we clear the calculator. So here we are going to clear this as well. And I'm actually going to move the console log inside the accumulator as well. So now what we do is that on digit press, we add number. On clear calculator, we empty the string, and then we show the update accumulator view. So now when we save this and go forward, you can see that I can type things, and then if I hit AC, it clears out. All right. So I hope this makes sense that we are doing this information. All right. One of the things that I want to see is, so now that we have this information, let's talk about what do we do when we have to sort of press a button, which is an operator. So we are not doing anything right now, but we will do it. So we'll say const operator pressed, and here we're gonna have this thing, and then here we're gonna do the same thing actually, but here we're gonna have the operator. So instead of number, we're going to do an operator, and we are essentially just adding the operator to the view. The only difference would be when I'll tell you what the difference is. So here you can see that we have nothing on the view, and if I press plus now, what happened? Oh, I haven't applied this on any operator. So I'm gonna copy this, go back here, then we have the operator, this one, which is divide. So I'm gonna say on click or divide, we are going to use this. So we are passing the operator pressed and using this here for divide. Then we have multiply, so for that one as well I'm going to use multiply. Then we have minus here, so we're going to say minus here. Then we have plus here, so we're going to say plus here. And now just save this and try this out. So here if I start pressing any of these buttons, you can see that they are now stacked on top of each other, right? Now the only problem is that this will not work. Why? Because this doesn't look like a calculator to me. So we are going to see what happens when we use certain things. But one thing that we want to do, at least right now, let's say for the happy case, is that if we have everything right, like 9 plus 6, then when we hit enter, this should calculate this and show this on the view or on the total. So let's actually try to do that. So I'm going to go here and then create a new function here, and I'm going to call it equal pressed. Here, what we are going to do is that we are going to evaluate the string, the accumulator string, and get the result out of it. Okay. What we want to do on equal is whatever we have this in this accumulator string, or whatever we have here, we calculate that and then we show that here in the total, just like this. Okay. So for that, what we need to do is that we can say we have something called result, and then we use the eval, and then we use that on the accumulator string. Once we do that, we should be able to have this value actually inside this result value, and then we need to do something, and that something is that first we need to update this as an empty string. So we need to have this accumulator string that needs to be updated. So we are going to say accumulator string after the result is going to be empty, but let's not just do it. Let's first update the total view. So I'm going to go here, copy this function and call this update total view, because we are now going to update the value in this total element. We already have this accumulator figured out, but we don't have this total figured out yet. So I'm going to copy this class, and then in the update total view, I'm going to get the total element. Here, I'm going to use this class to get the total element. And once we get that, then we are going to assign the total element in our HTML to the result. So we need to pass the result from here, or we actually have this total variable. So we are going to use that instead. So we are going to say total. And here, when we have this equal value result, we are instead going to assign this to the total. And then we are going to say update total view. And also we are going to update the accumulator view as well, but later on. So when we call this update total view, that means that we are updating this total, and then we are using that to show this into the UI. So let's try this out. I'm going to refresh this. I'm going to put a breakpoint to equal. Let's bring this up a bit. It's too low. So equal pressed here. And now let's try adding something. So let's say 9. So we got 9 here. Let's move a bit downwards if we can. And then here you can see that we have plus, and then we say 7. So 9 plus 7. Now if we press equal, we don't have this assigned. I forget that all the time. So on this equal button, we need to apply the on click and then equal pressed. So on click, we are going to do this equal press, and then that should trigger the function for us. So if we refresh, do 9 plus 9 and then do an equal, you see that we come inside this function, and inside this function we are now using the accumulator string, which is 9 plus 9. So it's now going to evaluate it. Once it does, it gives us the value out of it, which is 18, a number. Then we use the update total view to go inside this function, see the total value, which is right now 18, move forward, console log it. So now it's on the console. And now we are getting the total element. So if I move forward, hover over it, you see that we have their output total element, but it doesn't have a value, so it's not being shown. So now we are assigning the value 18 to that. So as soon as I move forward, you see now that we got the 18 value. Okay, so this is what you would do. So if I just play, you can see that now we got the value out of it. However, in a usual calculator, whenever we press equals, this accumulator string goes away. It goes empty. So whenever we're pressing equal, we need to set the accumulator string empty after we have shown the total view. So we can show accumulator string equals empty, and here we can essentially go and say accumulator view or update it. Now, one thing that I want to do is not to repeat myself. So what I can do is I can use something like update accumulator view and use something like new value here and update total view new value, and instead do this thing inside the update accumulator view. So here we are doing two things. We're using the new value to assign to this accumulator view, console log here. And similarly, we are going to assign the variable total to new value and then log total and then update that as well. All right. And then wherever we are using this update accumulator view, we just need to now add this new value. So we can say something like operator pressed, and we can pass this right here. Let's see. Operator press is here as well. And now for the equal pressed as well, we are gonna go and see where this is called. So here instead of plus, I can use something like this. And then here I can just pass this value. Clear calculator. All right. And instead of this, we could use const result, and then we can pass this result here to total. Let's see what do we have else. All right, we're good. So now let me share with you what is actually happening when we do these things one by one. So let's refresh. I'm gonna put a breakpoint on equal. I'm gonna put a breakpoint on this one, this one, this one, and let's see what happens when we start and we do things one by one. All right, cool. Let's play. So first, let's try adding 9 plus 9 and equals to 18. So when we press 9, you see that by default, the accumulator string is empty. So what we are doing here is that we are adding this number to accumulator string, and then whatever the result comes out of it is passed into this accumulator view. So if I move inside, you will see that this number 9 is going to be added to this string and passed as a new value to the update accumulator view. Now the responsibility of this update accumulator view is two things. One, update this new value to accumulator string. And the second thing is we actually want this to be updating the UI as well. So the first thing first, it updates the accumulator string, then it logs it, then it gets the element, and then it adds the accumulator string to the inner HTML. So here you can see that we see 9. Similarly, when we press plus, you will see that it has the value 9, then it adds the operator to 9, which becomes 9 plus, and it passes that into update accumulator view. So here the new value becomes 9 plus. It assigns this value to accumulator string, and then it moves forward, and then it updates the UI. So now we have 9 plus. Similarly, if we press 9 again, you will see that it goes inside, then it becomes 9 plus 9. It updates the variable, goes and updates the UI. And now if I press equals, you will see that now it gets the accumulator string, which is 9 plus 9. It evaluates it. It sees the result as 18. It passes it inside, and the new value for total, which was 0 before, now that becomes 18. And now it updates the UI. Now when we do this, we also need to make sure that this becomes empty. So in order to do so, when we press equal, we also need to update the accumulator view to empty string, which means that this will now become empty. So now if I refresh, remove the breakpoint, let's say we try 9 plus 9, kind of bring this down. So if we have 9 plus 9, and if I press equal, you see that we only see 18, the above view is gone. That is what we actually want. So whenever we press equals, then it becomes the only output. and now I can start with a fresh sort of say number. So if I press 6 now, you can see that now we got 6 plus 6 plus 6, and if I hit enter, you see 18 now. Okay, so now this is sort of making sense, but there are a few corner cases that we need to handle. The first thing that we have is when we press AC, this also needs to go away. When we press AC, this also needs to clear. So in the clear calculator, you can see we are using the update accumulator view only, but we also need to update the total. So we are going to say update total view, and here we can say 0. So when we don't have anything, then we need to provide just the total itself. So we refresh, we do something here, then we press AC, it becomes 0. Now this looks more like a calculator. And this is something that we need to do in the beginning as well. So we are actually going to go into this main method and paste this and call the main method from the end. Now this actually means that in this particular case, whenever we refresh, we should be updating the view to 0. But that will not happen, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, I'm going to stop Coca stop all. So if I save this and refresh, you will see that this will not work. And the reason for not working is right now you will see an error on console, and that says cannot sell inner HTML of null. And the reason for that is when it comes here to try to get a document, it sees nothing. Let me show you why that happens. So if I refresh and it comes update total view, it goes forward. So let's do this one more time. We got main, we got this one. If we refresh, you will see that it comes to this main line, then it comes inside. It tries to set 0 to the calculator, but the reason is that if I go inside, till here we are fine. But as soon as it tries to get this calculator object, it cannot. Why? Because the element actually does not exist. You can see that in the HTML, we only see the head and not the body. Why is this a problem? Why do we have this situation? Because in the HTML, we do have the body, we do have the head, but why don't I see a body at this moment? The reason is that when the browser is compiling these files, we only have this head, and when we reach this main.js, it quickly comes inside, it starts executing this code. Now, when this starts executing this code, the body has not been rendered. The body is not there on the UI. So it is trying to access this element even before this is available on the UI. And this is a classic problem when we work with HTML and JavaScript. And the reason is that this JavaScript here is blocking and it's not allowing this body to be shown. So what usually happens in the production applications is that instead of this JavaScript here, we essentially not put it in the head, but we rather put it just before the body closes. So before the body closes, we put it here. Now what would happen is that when the browser starts rendering it or starts executing the whole process, it comes inside, does everything in the head, then it starts rendering the body, and when it reaches at this point, then it starts the JavaScript. By that time, we already have this body rendered, and then this works. So if I save this, refresh, and now try this, it goes inside, goes forward, tries to get the element, and you see now we have the HTML rendered. So now it gets the element, and now we won't see that problem. So on the console, there shouldn't be any error. So we don't have any error. So this is a really important trick when you're working with HTML and JavaScript, that you put your script, if it's blocking especially, into the end of the body like this. All right, so hope this makes sense. This is a really cool and neat trick that you will learn as you work with JavaScript. Now if I try something like this, plus 55 and equal, you see the value here. But then if I press, let's say 99, and if I hit AC, you see that now we got 0. Okay, so this is super cool. We now understand how this works. The only problem that I see right now is that when we start typing something, this total should not be shown, because right now we are calculating something and this 0 doesn't make sense. So when we start typing a button, that means that we are calculating something. So in that case, this 0 should essentially be hidden. So what we do here is that instead of showing this, we hide this in that particular moment where we have this accumulator view. So we could do two things. We could either have this whole element hidden, and we can do that by passing a class. So what we can do here is that we can have this HTML, and here for this output total, we can have an attribute called hidden. What this does is that it hides it automatically. All right. So all we need to do is whenever we have a number being typed, we need to hide it. And then when we press equal, we need to show it, which means that when we have to hide it, we need to add this attribute. And when we have to show it, we need to remove this attribute. So we can go into JavaScript, and whenever we press the equal sign, then we need to show it. And then whenever we press a number sign, we need to hide it. Okay. So when we do a digit pressed here, we need to hide it. So we can say here that we get this total view. I'm going to copy paste it here for now. I'm not doing any sort of clean code at the moment, but you will get the idea. So whenever we have the digit pressed, we need to hide it. So we get the calculator total element here, and then here we have attribute, and we have essentially set attribute, and then we have this here called hidden, and then we have the value that we want to provide set to true. So whenever we press a digit, we will hide this. So let's save this. If I press 9, you can see that got hidden, right? As soon as I press a digit, that gets hidden. But when we have equal pressed, then we want it to be shown. So in that case, we're gonna go here, and then we are going to do the same thing. We're gonna get this total element first. Then we're going to remove this attribute hidden. So we can say remove attribute, and then here we can say hidden. So if I refresh now, press 9 plus 9 and press equals, now you see that it coming back. All right. So if I show you the element itself, right click, inspect, and this is fine. Now you see that here in this total view, if I press a number, you see that we have hidden true applied to it. But if I then press equals, you can see that now the hidden attribute is gone. And this is how you would show or hide something really quickly by just applying some attribute. So now that we have this, you can see 9 plus 9 equals, this works now. The only problem is that I could do 9 plus minus equals and whatnot. So we don't want this. And the logic for this one is if we have a number being shown and we have an operator, then we don't want to add another operator on top of one operator. We need to make sure there's only one operator at the tail of this accumulator string. So two things that I see. One is if I press AC, I don't see 0. So let's fix that. So here we have the update total view, but it's not showing the total view. So when we update the total view, we actually need to, instead of digital press here, what I can do is, yeah, this one. Whenever we update the total view, we also need to do this, or actually go inside and just do this here, remove hidden. So if I refresh, type something, press enter, click AC, we got 0. If I do something like this and then press AC, we also got 0. So we are good there. One thing that I was talking about is 9 plus. So when we press an operator, we need to make sure there's only one operator. So when we press this operator, we get into this function, which is operator pressed with the operator. And we need to check if we have another operator already present. So what we can do there is that first we need to make sure that if we have already an operator, so we can call it, let's say, not in here, but we can call it here. So we can say const last character, and then we can get the accumulator string here and get the last character out of it. So the way to do it is to do accumulator string dot length -1, and let me show you how that works. And then we console log it, for instance. So here we refresh, we press 9, we press plus, and here if I hit plus again, you see that we got 9 plus. So if I put a breakpoint here, whenever we press an operator, which is here, you will see that once we press a plus, we get this value here, and you can see that we have this accumulator string, which is 9 plus. Now this string is essentially an array of characters, which means that I could do something like, if I do accumulator string, which is this 9 plus, if I do a 0, you see the first character, which is 9. Similarly, if I do 1, you see the second character, which is plus. Similarly, if I do 2, you see the third character. But if I do 3, then you'll see undefined because there are no more characters. So it's 0, 1, 2. Okay. Now, if I wanted to check the last element, that is 2, but that is also sort of 1 minus the equal length of it. So here you would see that we have accumulator string, and we could do accumulator string dot length minus 1, which is also the last element. So here we are getting the last character out of it, which is this, and then we are checking the last character. So here we'll check if the last character is an operator, and we can check it by saying if it's not a number, then we need to do something. So this last character, if is nan, which means it's not a number, it's actually an operator, then we essentially need to do something. So here, and let's quickly check this as well. So if we check is nan of 22, we get false because it's a number. But if we get plus, then you can see it's true. If we get divide, it gets true. If we say multiply, it gets true. So for all operators, this will be true. If that's the case, then we need to be able to remove the last operator and then add the new operator. So we are going to do something like this. We're going to say, hey, accumulator string that we have, we are going to take a substring of it, and then we are going to essentially add the new one afterwards. So we are going to say after this one, we can say accumulator string plus operator. So if we refresh this, let me show you what happens. Refresh, remove these, update total view, remove these, and just the operator press. So here if I have 9 and if I hit plus, it will go forward. It will check last character, which is 9. So this will not go inside this chunk because it's a number. Then it will go 9 and add plus. So we'll add these two things. If I hit play and then if I hit press plus again, you will see that now the last character is plus. So this will now go inside this block, and then this will now remove this plus from this string using this logic. So we are saying, hey, take a substring or take a chunk of this string and start from the 0 index, which means from the start, and then end into length minus 1. So the length of this is 2 and minus 1 is 1, which means that you start from 0 and you finish just before 1. So that means that it's going to just take this 9 and remove the plus. So now if I go forward, you will see that now the accumulator string is only 9. So we removed the operator from there. And now we can add this plus that we just triggered, and then we just remove that. So we could do either that, or we could also just say return. But the difference would be if I changed my mind and if I said, hey, I'm not going to do plus, but I'm going to do minus. So if I do minus, see what happens. It goes here, it gets the last character, which is plus, which is here that you see. Then it removes it. So now we have 9 remaining, but now it adds minus to it. So you can see that quickly the plus changes to minus. And now you can play around, divide, multiply, whatever you add. So if you want to change operator, you can click, keep clicking, and you can see the operator being changed. So this is how you would make sure that there's only one operator during a number. But if I press 9 again, that works. If I press multiply, that also works. If I press 9, that works. If I press minus, that works. But if I now press any operator, the operator only changes. So this is a really cool trick that we just did to make sure that we are only having one single operator. Now that we have this, we can press equal and you see the output here. Okay, so hope this makes sense. Now, what we want to do is we have all the things in place. But now if I press plus in the beginning, you can see it also allows me to add plus without even any number. So in order to do that, we need to make sure that we have at least one number before an operator is placed. So here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to check if the accumulator string dot length is 0, which means that there is nothing in the accumulator string. There's no accumulator string. Then we'll just do, let's say, a return. Okay, so here if I press this, you can see that now if I hit press or hit plus, nothing happens. Okay, so that's the first thing. But now there's a problem. If I do 99 plus 1, that makes it 100. Accumulator string is empty, but there's a total. Now what if I want to add one more into this 100 or 5 more? I would want to press plus, but you see nothing happens. So there are two conditions here. One, when we have no input or no total and we try to press plus, that should not work. But if we have a total just like this, and now if I press plus, it should work. So here we are going to add another logic that if the total is 0, so we can say if total equals 0, then we return, okay? Otherwise, we are going to go similar to what we have so far. But if we have a total, then what we will do is that we will say, hey, take this total and then add that to accumulator. So we are going to say accumulator string equals, and then we are going to use a backtick. We are going to say total and then the operator itself. So let's see what we have here. So we have accumulator string plus operator. So actually what we want to do is just to have this total here. Total. So let's save this, try this out. So now you will see that now if I just hit plus, nothing happens. But if I do 3 plus 3, 6, now we have a total 9 here. But if I now press plus, this would be a bit different. If I hit plus, you will see that this will come here and see this is 0, but is the total 0? No, the total is 9 here. So it will not go inside here, but rather go in the else statement and set the accumulator string to the total, which is right now 9. So now you can see we have 9. Although this 9 is a number and we have a string, so we need to convert this to string. So we could say total.toString, or in the ex6 terms, we could do something like this, which is string interpolation or template literals, so to say. So now let's say 6 plus, I'm going to move forward, 3 equals 9. If I hit plus now, you see it comes inside, and now here the accumulator string is going to be the string value of 9. Now it's going to check other things as well, and then update the view to be 9 plus, right? You can see that this becomes it here. And 9 plus, then we can add more values like 6, and then here we can say equals 15 plus, and then we can go on and on and on. Plus 9, plus 4, and you can see that now we are changing values as we go forward, right? So this is now coming out as a really cool UI, and we have this information in place as well. One thing that I notice is if I have a look at this calculator, you will notice that sometimes these views jump. For instance, if I press 9, it's here, but now if I do plus 6 equals, you see 5, but then if I do plus, now you can see that this came downwards a bit. So the positions of these elements are not set. So what we would want to do is to define the heights for these elements to stick in place. You can see the height of this element right now is 28 pixels or 29 pixels. So let's set that in the CSS. I'm going to go here in the accumulator and set the height here. Now this was 29 pixels, and this guy here has a height of 64.5 pixels. So let's say 65 pixels. So we're going to set this to height 65 pixel. Save this, and now these won't change their places. Now you can see that if I press 9, it stays in place. All right. The only problem that I see is when I have this removed, then this becomes a problem. I think what we can do is actually, instead of using the hidden attribute, we can use a class, but let's keep it for now, not to make it too complicated. All right. So now we have this 66 minus, and then we have 9 equals, we got the calculator here working, and now we can move forward with the rest of the stuff. So let me quickly check if we have not covered anything. One of the things that I can recall right now is that if I have a big number, oh, this is one problem as well. We had something called 366 equals plus 6, and now if I press enter, there's a problem. So if I have 66 and then we have plus, we have 6 here, and if I hit enter, you can see that we have a value here. But if we press enter again, then something got wrong. So let's see what happens when we do this. So if we press enter here, at this point, we remove it hidden. Okay. Then we have the accumulator string, which is empty. And then we do something like this. So if we don't have anything in the accumulator string, when we do equal pressed, then we should not be doing anything, or we should not be considering this equal scenario. So in this case, we're going to go here in the equal pressed, and we could quickly check if accumulator string dot length equals 0, then don't do anything and return. So then this case would not happen. 66 plus 66 equals, we got this, and now if I press enter, nothing happens. Okay. One of the things that we have is floating numbers, a really good big number, something like this. You can see that we have a limitation of text here as well, but I'm not talking about that, but rather talking about if I do it by divided by, let's say 4, you see that we get this text, which is huge, but we also have some number here as well, right? What if we do something like 22 divided by 7 equals, you see that it's a huge text and it goes out of the screen. So in order to limit that, what we can do is when we calculate the result, here we can check if the result is having a floating number or not a floating number. So here you could see that we have this result, which is the evaluation here. But in order to check this, what we can do is that when updating the total view, we can get the total value here. But when we are assigning this total value to the HTML, before that, we can check if this total is a floating number or not. So we are going to check here, const is floating, and check if the total sort of divided by, or if we take the remainder. So if total divided by 1 equals to 0, that means that this is not a floating number. This is an integer. So if that's the case, then yeah, if we have a not here, that means that this is floating. So if this is a floating number, then we need to do total dot toFixed to, otherwise we're going to use total itself, and then we are going to assign it. Now let's try this out. If we do 22 divided by 7 and do equals, you can see that we get 3.14. So in this particular case, since it's a floating number, we kind of stop it and we kind of go forward with just using the toFixed. So here, if I refresh, you see that here it would come with a new value. If I do 22 divided by 7 equals, you come here, you set the new value, which is 3.14285 blah blah blah. It goes forward, it goes here, and now it's checking if this whole number, if divided by 1, do we get any remainder? If we don't get any remainder, then it's floating, and you can see that this is true because this is a floating point number, which is 3.14 blah blah blah. And in this case, we use the toFixed 2 to make sure the output only has 2 decimal points, so 3.14, and this now makes it much more clearer for our calculator. So hope this makes sense. I'm just thinking about any use case that we might have missed. So we covered the clear part as well. We covered other things as well. By default, if we have nothing in the view, we cannot press plus. If I wanted to do something like 3 plus equals, then you see we get 0. And that is because it crashed with unexpected end of input. So if that becomes the case, then we need to just alert the user that it's a wrong input and don't do anything. So if we have equal pressed and we evaluate the result, then we don't need to do anything. So I'm going to remove actually this here, move it here, and then here I'm going to put this all in the try catch block. So here we have the try, here we have the catch, and then here we can say alert, the input provided is not valid. Or we could say something like you broke the calculator. So now that we have this, let's try this. We say 3 plus equals, and now it says you broke the calculator. And in that case, we also need to clear the view. So we can say clear calculator and then refresh. And if we say 3 plus equals, you say you broke the calculator. Okay. And now it's in the beginning state as well. So now that we have this whole information here, I think we are good to go and we can wrap up this calculator itself. I don't believe we are missing anything. We do miss some of the things, like what happens if I press delete, what happens if I press 0 dot. That's not covered yet, but we can definitely check that out maybe in the later stream, since it's about 2.5 hours of stream. So I'm gonna kind of close this at this point. We do have all the code, all the logic here. I'm gonna push this as well. Just give me 1 second to see if I'm missing anything. No, I don't think so. So we're actually good. Now you could try implementing the remaining stuff, which is what happens if I press delete. So if I press 9 and if I press 8, then delete should be removing 1 character from this. All right. Similarly, if I press something like 9 plus, then if I press delete, then this should remove this plus button. So try implementing this thing, what we have remaining. Try implementing this percentage sign as well. Try implementing the dot as well. And dot is going to be very simple. You just press dot once, but then you have to also make sure that if you press dot multiple times, it doesn't add up. The logic would be similar to that of an operator. Similarly, if you have other things like I don't think we need to cover full screen, but the rest of the things looks good. You could also try to animate this as well if you want to show characters popping out or kind of changing out. Try changing the UI of this one, make it your own, and yeah, then let me know what you build so we can showcase that on the next stream as well. So I'm gonna quickly go and push this code. anything that is not saved. But yeah, if you want to have a look at that, make sure to check out the repository. I'm gonna share the link with you right away. So if we go here, and there I just pushed the final code. Alright, so I hope that you found this video useful. If you did, give this a big thumbs up. If you have not subscribed to the channel, do it right now and consider becoming a supporter via the Patreon. You should be able to see the link right here. I stream on Twitch every week, so you should be able to find me live coding there and enjoying words with my community, and you can also find some good friends there as well. Also, share this video with your friends so they can also learn how to build this calculator. And as always, happy coding, and I'm gonna see you next time.